Open shirt thing going on there. I'm liking it.
Yeah, little tatty.
That's not open. That's closed. That's open.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Skeptic Hangout, the place where we sit back, relax, and discuss some of humanity's most controversial and intriguing concepts through the lens of skepticism. We have with us today Richard, who is excitable, pedantic, and colorful, Laura, the energetic, passionate chatterbox, and Richard, who is enthusiastic and witty, yet formless. Today, we will be discussing conspiracies. So grab your English tea, iced coffee with vanilla creamer, or your champagne, and get comfy and join us as we unpack whether or not Elvis is still alive. All right, so Richards, hello. It's good to be with you today.
Hello.
Gilliver, are you celebrating something with your champagne?
No, I just live like this all the time.
It's champagne hour over in England right now.
Yeah.
It's 1 PM my time, but for you, it's about champagne time.
Yeah.
So, Richard, what have we got going on this week?
Well, this week in the past and this week in the future, I have been and will be enjoying our Facebook discussion group greatly. I'm just so chuffed with the interactions we've been able to have with people who are enjoying our show. And it's really worthwhile for us three. And I know we've not actually spoken about this, but I think for all of us three, it really validates the conversations we have here and expands our knowledge on things that other people have got to say and input. So, yeah, it's been great. So if people who are watching this are not already part of our official discussion group, and it's the official one, don't accept any imitations, then find that in the description to this episode. And obviously subscribe to the show and share it with people you like and love and or hate. And
absolutely.
Feel free to use this show as a punishment for people who you dislike.
Absolutely.
That's all I had to say.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm really excited about this week's topic just because there's so many crazy ways we can go with it. So I'm thinking, why don't we start by just kind of sharing, so Gilliver, what is one of your favorite conspiracy theories?
My absolute favorite conspiracy theory. I've just done a top 10. I hate these top 10 things you see on the internet, but I've just done one in one of my Takeout Extra episodes.
I'll beat him,
I hate it, but I'm doing it anyway.
I didn't want to do it in the main episode, so I've got these little in-between episodes that I do every so often, and that's where I put them just out of the way, just for the real hardcore viewers to go and look at. The number one I chose on that were that animals are fake.
Animals are fake.
Zebras, duck-billed platypus, animals like that have been faked by governments, presumably, to forward some kind of really unknown, bizarre thing. I don't know. But yeah,
I have never heard that before.
It's fantastic. It's brilliant.
That's worse than Flat Earth. Yes.
Yeah, in my conspiracy, it's my Takeout Episode Extra 4, number 4, the extra episode. There's a link in the description. It will take you to the video from the guy who thinks that animals are fake. Go and check it out.
Goodness.
It's absolutely brilliant.
Wow.
I gotta see that.
Conspiracies as an idea, it's like, because conspiracy doesn't have to be this sinister thing, does it? Like, if we were planning on something and keeping it secret from someone, say if we had a mutual friend whose birthday it was, and me and you two were planning a birthday surprise, you could describe that as a conspiracy. Like, we're conspiring together to plan this thing without them knowing.
Yes.
And obviously the conspiracy theories that we're talking about generally have this sort of sinister overtone where there's things working in the background that no one really sees, no one really knows about. And there's always some sort of hidden purpose behind things, isn't there? So with the animals, is there a consensus as to what the purpose of that conspiracy is?
I don't. I just think it's fantastic that somebody has gone to such trouble to actually come up with a conspiracy about animals being fake. I'm assuming that it's got something to do with governments hiding things from us and God. They have to be involved in some point, in some way, shape, or form.
So I completely get the whole like conspiracy theory around like faking dinosaur bones or not really knowing how to date bones and just making it up and stuff. Like, if you told me that, I would totally get it, because that contradicts a worldview, right? And they want to keep that worldview going. But like faking a duck-billed platypus, like I guess I just don't see it. What's that?
It does seem faked. It does look made up.
I mean, he does, yeah.
I mean, there are people who believe that Australia isn't real, which is like, I mean, we all have a mutual friend who lives in Australia, so
she doesn't really.
Yeah,
she lives in like Indiana. She lives in Indiana and she fakes the accent. Yeah,
that accent is brilliant that she puts on. It's fantastic. Yeah. So Tangel, shout out to you.
Yeah. Who we'll have to have on the show and do a whole episode just on her.
So my turn for my favorite.
Yes, get Jill.
So I think I mentioned to you two off camera last week or whenever it was, but I did at one point fall down the rabbit hole of believing that 9/11 was faked by the US government. And so, well, not necessarily faked, but like that they were behind it and there was no other. And I think part of it, especially nowadays, is the fact that people can use technology to really enhance a narrative and really effectively push a narrative on social media, and you can have access to information instantly that you just wouldn't have seen or had access to in the past. And so, like I saw on YouTube, I mean, this is like, I'll be talking over a decade ago that I was in this place. But like, I saw these YouTube videos comparing like how one of the Twin Towers collapsed and like the way it went floor by floor looked exactly like a planned demolition of a building. And there were these like side by side comparisons you could see. There were the things about like the specifics around like certain, I can't remember it was like Air Force units were like on training sessions all at the same time, which never normally happened, but was on that day. And there were all these things which sound and sort of come together to form a cohesive sounding story. And yeah, to me, there was a motive that made sense, use this as a pretense for war, which obviously the attacks were used as a pretense for war, but like they manufactured that and what have you. But there's no way of me investigating that apart from seeing videos that people shared on YouTube back in goodness knows when. And I think it's, sort of indicative of the kind of access that people have to information with lots of other conspiracy theories as well. I don't know what you two think about it.
What I like about that one the most, as opposed to some other theories like the flat earth theory and QAnon and stuff, is that one actually has a really compelling argument and a lot of like science behind it that is really legit. So yeah, from my perspective, like the way that the building fell has a lot more, it says a lot more about the construction and how they're designed to fall that way so they don't do damage to the buildings around them. And how the steel beams work and all that stuff. It says a lot more about that, but people don't know that kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So I think I love that conspiracy theory just because it's so simple and believable, but it has all this complex science around it that just really makes it look legit.
And I think as well, because it seemed to have a motive that was clear and sort of directly related to the event itself. Whereas like, flat earth as an idea, it's like you've kind of got to extrapolate this sort of why this is happening. Why would this secret be kept from us? Why is it not out in the open? Why do we not know about it? What is being kept away from us? Whereas to me, it seemed like 9/11 has a very clear outcome and it's linked to this specific action that was taken. So, I fell into that one a little bit, and I'm certainly not there now, but I don't even know why I'm not. It's not like I've been presented with some big evidence that I'm not. I guess I've just sort of forgotten about it and it's just become less important to me. I don't know.
That was, so if it was about 10 years ago, we're talking about 10 years actually after the event.
Well, it was at least 10 years ago. I only 10, 15 years ago, perhaps. I mean, when it happened, I was 10 years old, so I wasn't able to sort of, access that. I was in junior school. So, it's certainly been since then. So, I mean, YouTube started 2005, did it? And it would have been a couple of years after that, probably, that I had access to that sort of stuff. So,
and I remember seeing like an actual documentary like off YouTube. I can't remember if it was like on Netflix or what, but I remember seeing like a production about it that was really compelling. And for a heartbeat, I was like, wow, that's really good info.
Just to completely take us off topic, what was it like being a 10-year-old and having that news come at your life? Because I've never been that young and have such a major event happen, which is the biggest thing I remember is the Challenger space shuttle disaster.
Oh yeah.
And it was a huge event, and it was it impacted me because as a child at that time, because they had a school teacher on board, we were like, we'd been told to like go and watch this launch. This is going to be fantastic. And it unfolded before our eyes. That was a massive event, but it was nothing on the scale of 9/11. So what was that like as a 10-year-old witnessing that?
It's really strange how clear a memory I have of that. I don't have many memories, I don't think, of that sort of time in my life, really, but I have a very clear image of being at school. We went home. I think I was in like year 6 or top end of junior school. And so I might have walked home on my own, and I got in and it was on the news, like BBC News was on. I remember seeing it, and my mum wasn't in the room. So I was just like watching it for a few minutes. And then I went upstairs and I was like, what's going on? Because I didn't really know what the Twin Towers were. I hadn't really heard of them. I knew New York as a place, obviously, but I didn't really necessarily realize the significance of the Twin Towers and all of that sort of stuff. Didn't really have a grasp on the geopolitics of the Middle East and all that lot. So to me, it just seemed like a surreal sort of movie sort of thing going on. But
like
obviously,
distant.
and because it was so far away, it was really difficult to sort of connect with it at the time. I knew it was terrible, and it obviously didn't stop being on the TV for weeks. I mean, they just kept talking about it, understandably, because it's definitely something to talk about. But I do remember like grown-ups being upset about it when they talked about it and stuff like that. But yeah, it's strangely vivid in my mind that day.
But I've heard that like that's true for a lot of people, especially in like the Western cultures, that you ask anybody where they were or what they were doing when they found out about 9/11, and they can tell you exactly. Like I still have vivid memories of exactly where I was and how I found out.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Okay, so my favorite conspiracy theory. You guys ready to hear it? Have you guys ever heard of the Pentaveret?
The Kenny Everett?
The Pentaveret that meets in Colorado in a place called the Meadows. And it's made up of the Queen, the Vatican, the Gettys, the Rothschilds, and Colonel Sanders.
Okay, this is going to be my new favorite conspiracy.
Okay, so for more information on the Pentaveret, see the clip in the links below. Because I thought you guys might actually get it.
Our dumbfounded faces.
I know. I was like, wow, they've never seen that.
No.
Okay, so favorite conspiracy theories done. What are your guys' understanding of sort of like what makes something a conspiracy versus what makes it just news, right? Like what sets something apart as a conspiracy?
I think that it is, and I've done a bit of research on this because, as I said, I've done an episode on conspiracy theories on my own channel, so I had done a little bit of background research, and I think the thing, we're all prone to bias and being fooled, and as we say on virtually every episode of this program, our minds are really bad at interpreting the world. Mm-hmm. We're all prone to cognitive bias. We're all prone to falling victim to things. And that's why, as Richard mentioned earlier, our friends, when they're planning a birthday party for us, can put one over on us so easily because we are so easily fooled. And we do. And sometimes, to compound that, sometimes there are genuine things in the world which are covered up. And as I referred to earlier when I talked about the Challenger disaster, there was a genuine conspiracy involved in that, where they tried afterwards to conceal some of the information about the O-rings which caused the disaster.
Yeah.
And it took people who were on board of the actual investigation to do extra digging. And even then they tried burying that in the like afterthoughts of the official report. It was released in the official report, but it was like it was put at the end.
And sort of like it might be this.
Yeah, and it was there are genuine conspiracies out there. I think the thing that separates those from what we would call a conspiracy theory is that what happens is we have cognitive bias, we investigate things. Sometimes they turn out to be true, like in the Challenger disaster. Sometimes we can't find evidence for these suspicions we have of conspiracies. At that point, most people would say, I can't find evidence of this. Let's push it to one side. If evidence comes up in the future, then, we'll look further into it. What happens with the conspiracy theory is that people don't push it aside. What they do is they say, I haven't found evidence for this. Therefore, there must be some secret or somebody keeping a secret and making it unavailable to us for some kind of nefarious purpose.
So I actually heard that about conspiracy theories, is that an element that makes them even more powerful is that the lack of evidence becomes the evidence for the conspiracy theory.
Definitely. It becomes what's called in psychology as a closed belief system. And that's what causes what I like to call a runaway train effect of conspiracy, because then everything you hear after that, every time someone comes along and says, well, you haven't got evidence for that, they take that on board as to say, well, that's what they want you to think. That's what they're telling you. And it just compounds and compounds and compounds. And
I think another big part of it is, I think, is it called proportionality bias? Am I right? Where like if something really big happens, it must have had a really big cause. And so like people think about like JFK being shot. That was a massive event that like impacted the entire world. Politics is a massive mark in history. Like things in the world nowadays will be completely different had that not have happened. And so because of that, people think there's these big conspiracies. Whereas obviously if the shooter had just shot an inch to the right or, whatever, and missed the target.
It would have been a failed assassination attempt.
It would have been a failed assassination. Nobody would
have.
By
a crazy guy.
More than that, yeah. And so it's like, because some things have, it's like with COVID being such a big worldwide, massively impactful thing that's going on, people, I think, automatically think it can't just be as simple as a virus passed from an animal to a human and then it spread, because it's such a big deal. It's too simple an answer, and so therefore there must be much more behind it. And again, like you said, with that closed belief system, once you've got that in your head and that's what you've already decided you're accepting, it doesn't matter how much or little evidence you have to the contrary. It's set in there.
Do you think that's why the flat Earth has such traction? And I know it's a small group of followers who actually believe it, but like, do you think that's why it even takes off at all? Is because it covers something that's so like the cover up that it would take to have a flat Earth and convince everybody that the Earth is round is so massively huge. It's so incredibly undoable. But do you think that's part of maybe the allure? Is like, well, that's
there was a I want to say psychologist, but I'm not sure if she was, who did some investigation into flat Earth, and I think the conclusion, the details are vague. I'll put the details on the Facebook group when they come back to me after the episode. But
reeling them in.
I'll look them up. But from what I remember, it was a journalist was doing an investigation, and she found that it was actually YouTube who'd caused this massive resurgence in belief in flat Earth, because until that point, I think it was around. I don't remember the year, 2003, 2004-ish, where it took on an initial resurgence because someone started a website for the Flat Earth movement, which had been dying out. It died out in the, I want to say 90s, because the Californian headquarters of the Flat Earth movement had caught fire. So it started dwindling a little bit after that. It had been quite popular until that point, and then it started dwindling a little bit. 2004 or 2005, somewhere around that time, someone set up a website for the Flat Earth organization. It started taking on a little bit of steam, but it wasn't until YouTube came along and people started sharing videos on YouTube that when they investigated it, they found that was a major cause of flat Earth being pushed and spread around the world.
As well, because, you watch one video and then YouTube's like, here's
10 more. Yeah.
Here's another one. Here's another one. And it goes on like that. And go on.
Fortunately, they have taken steps since then. And whenever there's a flat Earth video on now, they do put a disclaimer. I got it on one of my videos, which was kind of just talking about the history of flat Earth. And
oh, wow.
I got a disclaimer from YouTube on the bottom of my video, which basically said it's an archaic theory about the shape of the Earth and just kind of debunking it. But I get the feeling they did that as a reaction to the fact that so many people had pushed it on their platform.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder, like, how much that has to do with people when you can explain something coherently and academically, and you can put any sort of facts or science behind it, people generally will opt to believe versus not believe. Like, that people's first reactions are not always skepticism or not always questioning, or that feels kind of weird or doesn't sound right. A lot of times they're like, wow, that sounds really good. So I wonder if, like, that's why YouTube is so effective, is because you have this platform where people who can speak as though they know what they're talking about get in front of a camera, and when people watch it, they just kind of believe it.
Yeah, I think the thing is, this all stems back to the start of the modern flat Earth movement, which was started by someone called Samuel Rowbotham or Rowbottom. I can't quite remember. In the late I want to say 1890s, sometime around then. It may be a little bit early, maybe 1880s. And he started a movement called something to do with the Zetetic Society, or he wrote a book called Zetetic Philosophy. And that was it was direct like antithesis of what we would now call the scientific method.
Oh, okay. And it was called Zetetic
or Zetetic philosophy. Okay. And he started a Zetetic society, a transatlantic. I think there was a base in Britain, a base in the US. And he the essential form of this Zetetic philosophy was that you go out and you observe things, and that is the evidence of the thing. So because
the observance of the thing is the evidence of the thing.
So, but yeah, and because you go out, and he was really critical of the scientific method as well. So it was like all these things where you test and retest and predict. That's a load of rubbish. What is a more accurate form of doing things is to go.
Who needs measurements and recordings and data when you can just see something and come to a conclusion all while you're lonesome?
Definitely, and he went out and he basically said he wrote a book or a pamphlet under the name of Parallax, or
I recognize that.
Yeah, he called himself Dr. Parallax, and
I've heard that somewhere.
All the people called him Dr. Parallax, and he
released an 80s hip hop album. It sounds like the sort of
it does sound like a hip hop artist, huh?
Don't be saying that, because there will be someone writing a hip hop album about a flat Earth.
If there isn't already.
Ideas. Don't give them ideas. Essentially, it was that you go out and what you observe is the evidence of something, and that is carried on to this day. If you watch YouTube videos on the flat Earth subject, it is all about like, well, this is true because we observe it to be the case.
Things like I look out of the window and I can't see curvature, so therefore there is none.
And that is pretty much it.
Yeah,
that is pretty much it. If you look at this ocean, you see a horizon which is flat. You don't see a curve. Therefore, this is evidence that the world is flat. And this is literally this has continued since, like I said, the Rowbotham in the 1880s, 1890s, whenever it was. And that movement was carried on by various people, and still the same methods. one of the guy who formed the original Flat Earth Society, I forget his name, but the guy who formed the original Flat Earth Society, he had this idea that you should go out and like get children involved and like teach it to children.
Oh yeah, indoctrinate them young when they don't know any better.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
That is done now in the modern Flat Earth movement. You watch videos and there's people being arrested. There's two Nathans, I don't remember which one's which. One of them wrote a book aimed at children called The Earth is Flat, Like a Mat. And the other one went out and he actually got arrested for shouting at kids in the schoolyard.
Because that's
been
harassing.
Lied to.
Wow.
It says you've been lied to. The earth isn't really flat. They're lying to you. And he actually got arrested for it.
Well, not that I want to give money to this first Nathan guy, but I kind of want the book for my kids to read because they are shit hot little critical thinkers and they will find all the mistakes in that book. I would love to see their take on that story. Like I would even record that and do a video of them responding to
I think
that
she
book.
should. That would be brilliant.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, I remember when I first looked at it and I showed my wife, I don't know whether I'd chanced upon it or whether I'd been doing research or something and I'd come across it that way. But I showed my wife and she was just like in stitches of laughter.
Oh yeah,
it looks like a proper children's book. It's like all colourful and bright and
yeah. I'm all tickled. Like I'm excited about this. I mean, obviously I'm not because it really does warp people's brains, and then to reprogram children when they've been taught bad ideas is really shitty. But I think that's hilarious that it's gone.
But yeah, these ideas that the teaching the kids and the idea that you've got, the evidence is the observance. These go back to the starts of the modern flat Earth movement. They're not new ideas.
So that reminded me what you said, because even back in the 1800s, you can just using your own eyes and your own like tools what you have available to you, you can take measurements that prove that the Earth is round, and it's not difficult. So especially when you're
before that, yeah,
right. But I mean, at the time that this guy is doing all this stuff, like if he's saying just rely on your own, like your own senses and your own ability to observe things, even then you can observe that the Earth is round. So that's very interesting to me, because I think what he was really saying was use the bare minimum and don't look too hard and don't think critically and don't challenge, right, at all.
Yeah.
Right. Like I can't fathom how that is a good justification. Even back in the 1800s.
Has the motive behind the Earth being flat changed since the 1890s? Because I hear lots of things like, I don't know, there's loads of missiles held somewhere, or there's what, like, was there a motive behind the conspiracy originally that's changed?
I think the main motive, I'm not sure about the original guy, but what in about 1890, I won't say 1893, I may have got that date wrong. There was a woman called, a British woman, I think, called Lady Elizabeth Blount, I think her name was, who she started a flat Earth society based on the original guy Rowbotham's work. I think it was after he died, about 10 years after he died, and she was like, and she had a closed belief system. If you actually, I've read the pamphlets she released, and it talks a lot about like she wanted to distribute it and get like clergy and things on board, but they wouldn't jump on board. And she said it was because they didn't believe in the like correct version of God, or they were like trying to push the proper teachings of God to one side. And even now, when you look at the modern flat Earth movement, and again I forget the name, but I've got a quote from a guy who is a flat earther who says overwhelmingly the flat Earth movement is like inspired by the fact that God made the Earth, and he made it flat, and it's all like based on their interpretation of Scripture. And I think overwhelmingly the majority of flat earthers are like biblical believing Christians.
Yeah, so that's what I had heard as well, is that like the reason why this conspiracy theory is so attractive to certain people is because and a lot of times we as skeptics or non-believers will actually use this as evidence against the Bible. Like, hey, here it says here And I don't know what the exact verses are, but they discuss what sounds like a flat earth, which from an ancient person's perspective, not knowing anything about like advanced navigation or anything like that, not having been to the moon, right? It makes sense that they would think the earth is flat and write it into their scriptures. So now to justify it, we would say, well, look, it can't be God because they didn't know anything about science, right? And so
also thinking like the Genesis stories, and they're about, you know, there being light before there being the sun, and the sun before like all the stars in the universe, and how that model doesn't fit with our understanding of
I was actually about to say that I don't actually know the verses that talk about the flat earth in the Bible. I can't think of them from the top of my head, but literally, I think one of the reasons that I'm not bothered about those is that there is so much in there which does just make it stand on shaky ground anyway. And the thing that popped into my head was the Genesis account before you even said that,
right?
Because it's like the grass was created before the sun.
Right. And it's easy for so many people to just dismiss that as allegory, or we just don't understand or whatever. And they can say, no, I believe in science. I believe the earth is round. It's just allegory, or it's God did things in his own way and then presented it to us however he wanted to present it to us. But there's that core few that are like, no. The scriptures are literal and they literally say this. So now I need to justify it. And science goes against that. So now I have to reject science and I have to respin my understanding of reality in order to force reality to fit into the Bible. And
it's
so
like that default position of the Bible just is true. So therefore this other can't be. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I find it really, really annoying, if I'm honest. I'm sure you're both aware of who Kenneth Leonard is.
Yes.
Kenneth Leonard's a lovely, lovely guy. And the reason I first came across Kenneth Leonard is because I'd been having a conversation with an apologist for like 2 years in this philosophy group on Facebook. And he came along. And there'd been people coming and going, talking to this guy, this apologist. And Kenneth came along, and I saw him arguing with the same guy I'd been talking about. And I thought, he argues just like I do. I love this guy. And that's how I first found Kenneth. And but the guy we'd been arguing with, literally, he was so bad as an apologist because it was literally saying things like the entirety of Genesis is allegory. It's all like metaphor. It's all allegory.
Story.
Apart from the bit where God speaks the world into existence. And that bit's absolutely true.
And I know this
because it's literally cherry picking from the same text and like changing the genre of the text just to suit his story. And that I found that so frustrating. Things like that really get to me. Be consistent. If you're going to make shit up, be consistent with the shit you're making up, please.
And if you're going to say it's allegory, it's all allegory, right? Like you don't pick the one or two sentences that isn't, but the rest is. But I think that you hit on like a kind of an important point there, because like even if you take it outside of religion, that's what conspiracy theorists do as well, is they take this little point here and this little point there, or they take like this whole work and reject it. Oh, except for this part here because I can't, like, oh, cell phones work on this technology, so I can't reject that, but I can reject everything else around it. And so I think that I think that both the hardcore closed-minded religious people and the hardcore closed-minded conspiracy theorist people, I just think there's a lot of overlap in how the brain chemistry works. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there are a lot of conspiracies that don't entirely rely on religion, but there are a lot of those that are.
I just think the mindset is similar, is what I'm saying. Like the way you justify things and the way you pick what data you take and what data you reject, it just seems so similar to me.
Definitely.
I think moving sort of outside of the realm of sort of religious-based conspiracies, there's things like sort of death is always a big sort of driving force behind a good old conspiracy. So things like people who say there's a conspiracy and Elvis Presley didn't die and he's still alive out, I don't know, working in a mall somewhere in whatever, or the big conspiracies behind like Princess Diana's death and all the sorts of things. And I wonder what you guys think in terms of like, why do you think that is such a catalyst for conspiracies?
I think I don't honestly know. That'd be my first answer. I don't know.
No, but just what you think.
But I kind of think it has to do with two things. One is having to face death and the fact that someone who was like a great celebrity or greatly admired is now gone, and having to justify that. But the other thing is like all the sightings, like day to day, how often do we see someone that's like, oh, that's a celebrity, right, out of the corner of our eyes or whatever? And maybe it's not. Maybe it's just some guy that just happens to look like them, right? So then these celebrities die, and out pops all of these sightings, right, of people who say they saw them alive. And so I kind of wonder if it's a mix of our brains not being very good at identifying very specific features. You know, like you see someone in general in a crowd and you mislabel who that person is or see them. And then a mix of, oh my God, this celebrity's gone. And they were like, you think of Elvis, for example, like that's pretty huge. And he was young, right? So, and Diana, absolutely shocking, shocked everybody. They weren't ready for it. But yeah, and I also think that we have this need or ability to kind of like twist and turn things and throw them around in our heads. And then once it kind of starts to make sense and gains traction, then you share it with another person and they believe it. And then I mean, like what Gilliver said earlier is like the train. Like it starts out really slowly and it has almost no traction, no speed. And then all of a sudden you can't stop it. I don't know.
Yeah, what I find really interesting about what Richard said there was that, and I don't know if any of you two have picked up on this, but if you look at the two cases you mentioned, or if you look at Diana and you look at Elvis, both really famous people, both really popular people, nobody came back after Diana had died and said, we think we've seen her in the shopping mall somewhere.
Yeah.
But there were lots of different sightings of Elvis. And do you think it's possibly because, and I'm throwing this out there, I have no idea. Do you think it's possibly because Diana's death, the actual death, was so public and so exposed and so open that people couldn't make a conspiracy about the actual death? It was the circumstances surrounding it. Whereas Elvis died behind closed doors.
Right.
So his actual, whether he was dead was the conspiracy.
Yeah. So for her, it was, it can't be that simple. Like Princess Diana, it can't be just a car accident. It can't be just like an accident, right? It had to have been this big, vast conspiracy to take her out or, you know, whatever. But I think
not only was her death so public, like you said, Gilliver, but like the sort of issues she'd had in her marriage and people's knowledge about the royal family and their influence and power and all that sort of thing. I think all of that was very much on show as well at the same time. And all of it was also in the public psyche. Like everybody knew about all of that because it had been in the papers. I didn't because I was 6 years old.
I didn't because I'm an American.
Yeah.
But I did because I remember being really hungover and I'd like been in bed for like half an hour and my mum came and woke me up. I'd been out all night and my mum came and woke me up and said, do you know Princess Diana's died? And I was like, oh.
You're like, is it? That's terrible.
But yeah, I think all of that was really up in the air all at the same time as well, wasn't it? So I guess people joined those dots a lot more easily than, like you say, people, I guess, knew about Elvis because it was reported on the TV or people read about it in a newspaper, and it wasn't as easily accessible, the fact that he had died.
And I wonder, like, how many of these kinds of conspiracies are just a matter of our propensity for gossip? Like, it's just no more complicated than that, you know?
Yeah, Chinese whispers. What telephone? You call it telephone in the US, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with Chinese whispers too. Same thing. Yeah, but yeah. So my question to you guys is, as skeptics, how do you guys approach when you hear, and it doesn't have to be like if you hear a conspiracy theory that's already been labeled as a conspiracy theory, but when you hear something new that kind of contradicts a running narrative or what you know about a situation, how do you guys approach that to determine whether or not it is a conspiracy theory or whether or not it's something that's viable and potentially true?
I think one example recently is with all the COVID stuff going on, and obviously there's had to be lots of restrictions on our liberties in lots of ways. Not allowed, certain businesses having to close by law, people having to wear certain things in certain places at certain times, people having to stay at home. And I think lots of people often think, well, our liberties are being restricted, and so and I know we've talked about COVID before and it being this big thing, and so there must be big things behind it, but people think, oh, well, it's a stepping stone onto losing other liberties, and it's just going to be the first pawn that falls, and then it's going to be, a domino effect after that. I'm mixing my metaphors again. I'm good at mixing metaphors. I think my brain automatically thinks, well, what motive might there be in order for that to happen? And are the things that are happening reasonable to the situation that's at hand? So I've no reason to believe, I've no reason to disbelieve the scientists saying the original cause of the coronavirus in Wuhan, I can't remember the word for the virus moving from animals to humans, or I've no reason to disbelieve any of that. If I was given reason to disbelieve it, I would look into that and, address it as such. But I've no reason to disbelieve all of that. And so then I have to assume, therefore, I guess, that actions taken by governments that are also sort of being made and informed by scientific consensus, that those actions are reasonable in order to combat this virus. And I don't necessarily automatically then jump to, well, this is going to have this sinister effect further down the line, because I just see those things all matching up. Like the things that governments are asking people to do match up with the risks that are at play, and match up with what scientists are telling me about how the virus spreads and all of that lot. And it all just sort of, there's nothing else extra in there which makes me jump to those other things.
You know what else I find when you're talking about like how all the dominoes sort of line up, everything kind of makes sense. The big thing for me is how poorly so many people handled this. And I'm talking about like governments and local and community and hospital. Like it was a huge fustercluck, right? And you'd expect that from people who don't know what the hell they're doing, right? And so for me, it's like, no, the government really didn't know how to respond, and they really responded poorly, and they made a lot of mistakes. And I mean, all the governments and local and federal and you guys and us, and nobody really responded well to this. And so to me, it's like, oh yeah, no, that is humans responding to a real disaster, the real way that real humans would respond to it. Like there was nothing about the responses that to me was unusual. It was like, yep, none of us really know what the hell is going on, and none of us really know how to handle it, right? Everyone has ideas, and the idea fairies are going crazy right now. And it's turning into a huge mess. And so to me, that was like,
unless you live in Australia, which doesn't exist, which handle it really well.
Then you don't have to worry about it. Yeah.
Can I just say, you've started a new conspiracy theory about ideas fairies. I'm like,
you don't have those? They exist. We'll have to have a whole episode on idea fairies.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Deliver, like when you're approaching conspiracy theories or even just new information?
I would call it new information. I think I try and take the same approach to both. Mm-hmm. I think I'm quite lucky in that I'm aware how bad my brain works at assessing things. So I always try and be a little extra. I mess up everybody, messes up everybody, like falls into the trap of bias all the time.
Yeah,
all the time in everyday life. You can't help but doing it. I'm not going to go into this here, but I actually developed a little experiment to test your bias years and years ago as part of a meditation experiment.
Nice.
As a meditation experiment. But I'll talk about that further in the group if anybody's interested in that. I don't really want to go into it here. But
yeah, we should do a little sub video on that.
Yeah, well, it's but I think I always try and kind of catch myself anyway, and I think I miss the little things quite a lot. I think we all do. I think when it comes to the bigger things, because I'm consciously aware of trying to do this on a daily basis anyway, I think when it comes to like big conspiracy theory type things, I tend to be quite aware of what's like there are grey areas, but they're like real obvious ones. Mm-hmm. I think it's quite. I just don't really buy into them at all.
Yeah, so really. I think what you're saying is like step one is what is the real believability of it right off the bat, right? And if there's something like, well, oh, by the way, the Earth is flat, and all of NASA is lying to you, and every government on Earth is lying to you, and every textbook is lying to you, then you're like, okay. But then if you're like, well, 9/11 was faked, you're like,
Yeah, Richard was
a little
saying
more
a couple of weeks ago on one of the episodes about I can't remember what you were saying, Richard, but it was something about the.
I imagine it was brilliant.
I think it was quite brilliant.
That's why he can't repeat it. It was just too much.
It was about the balance of probabilities. I don't know if it was about UFOs or something along those lines, or crop circles. But we were talking about something, and you said, what's more believable, this thing down here or this thing up here? And why would you jump to this thing when you've got this thing down here, which is perfectly acceptable? And
not only do you have a thing down here, but there's also like 8 other things which are around this sort of that could be nowhere near up here.
Yeah, why jump to it? And that's not to say that this event up here is absolutely not true. It's just to say, like what you said, why is that the first place you go to, or why is that your leap without examining these other things first?
Yeah.
Right. Or without really compelling evidence. Right. Like what you talked about with the Challenger and the O-rings or whatever, is like, if there's compelling evidence that there was a problem, then even though it's a leap, like, okay, I'm fine with that. But
yeah,
like, why? Yeah.
Again, there's that whole thing of like, is it a big grand conspiracy to cover that up, or is it just some bloke who was like, shit, that was my job to fix that?
Right. Oh shit. Keep that out of the report. Yeah. Well, and that gets into the whole other thing about conspiracies, is the difference between like a conspiracy, meaning 2 or more people conspiring together towards an end, right? Whatever that may be. And then a vast conspiracy or a conspiracy theory that involves multiple entities and multiple like organizations or governments. Yeah. It's much easier for me to believe that like there's just like 2 dudes. Like there was a guy back when that put poison in aspirin. I don't know if you guys remember that. Like he worked, or she like worked in the aspirin factory and put like cyanide or something in aspirin pills, and they had to recall a whole bunch of them. I can't remember. So there's something to do with painkillers. I'm not going to try and say that this is what actually happened. Look it up. Maybe I'll look it up afterwards and we can link it. But if you're listening, do the research on it. But those kinds of conspiracies are easy for me to believe. A disgruntled employee goes and puts something into a factory somewhere and it gets tainted, versus, the Tylenol company is trying to kill millions of its,
which will be productive for profit purposes.
I agree, right? Okay.
You saying, Gilliver?
I think there's if it's similar to me to where we talk about religious faith, and this is going to sound like I'm going way off track, but bear with me. Where we talk about religious faith and we talk about something that's just acceptable to believe. If somebody tells you that they've got a new dog,
yes,
it's not something you have to jump to. You don't have to have a great deal of faith to believe in that thing. If somebody tells you they're in communion with an almighty first cause of the universe that's speaking to them, that takes a lot more evidence to have to believe that thing.
Sure. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with believing, if my best friend turns around, she's got 3 cats. And if my best friend turns around to me and says, Richard, I bought a new cat, I'm not going to bat an eyelid and suspect her in any way, shape or form that she might not be telling the truth.
Like what I posted on Facebook with my daughter's birthday present, right? It was one of those really realistic looking stuffies. It looked like a little sleeping puppy dog. And so I'm like, hey, look at what she got for her birthday. And I got so many responses like, oh, wow, what does your other dog think about it? Oh, that's so cute. And all like, that's a lot of responsibility, all that stuff. It's like, it's a stuffy. Right. But you're right, because there is that sense of, I have no reason to disbelieve that it looks like a real dog. She posted that she got a birthday present, didn't elaborate, right? There's no reason to doubt like what your first impressions are, right? You just take it in and accept it. But I think we have a tendency to do that to an extreme, to the point where it's like, now we're accepting information that we have, like, it's completely unreasonable to accept that information.
It was a very realistic looking stuff.
So she opened it when I wasn't looking, and I turned around and I looked down on the ground, and there was a puppy on the ground. And I was like, oh shit. Right. And then I realized it was a stuffy. Very realistic.
That was the correct response to just coming across a puppy in your own house, though.
Well, without my knowledge.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, so getting back to the how to handle conspiracy theories, did you want to talk more on that, Gilliver, or?
No, I mean, the thing is, it's like I said earlier on in the show, I think checking yourself, if you're checking yourself for it, the way I would do it, if I came across something that was massive, that was huge, that was newsworthy, that I wasn't sure about, the first thing I would do is look to the evidence, see if I could find a reputable source of evidence for it. I wouldn't go to YouTube to do more research, air quotes, for the ones who don't watch us,
because
just listen
YouTube is
us.
a scholarly source, not.
But this is another thing you find with, just taking myself off topic a little bit, or doing a Billy Connolly, as I like to call it. The people who haven't got evidence, who want you to believe these things, who are invested in these closed belief systems, will always say, well, you need to do your own research. But they don't mean go out and do your own research, because they don't trust the trusted sources. What they mean is follow the lines of inquiry that they're following, so you inevitably come to the conclusion that they've come to.
Right. Do your own research, but do it here. Or read this document, or read this.
Go out, go and find a reputable source. Most things have research. Most things in the areas where conspiracies are reliant have either a good media paper trail or good scientific paper trail to follow. Go and do your research, find your thing, and if the evidence isn't there, throw it aside. Yeah. It's as simple as that. If the evidence isn't there, you don't need to continue thinking, well, I've come up with this idea, I'm convinced by it, so I'm sticking with it. If the evidence isn't there, throw it away.
And fair dues, like, bookmark it in here, and then when you do come across something, if you do come across something, you can drag that back out.
Yeah. There's no reason you can't change your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the same with us, and we talk about that a lot, don't we? We're very happy to be proven wrong, or to have, new information to update what we think about stuff. And it's just about keeping an open mind and not being dragged down into something which can actually just really steal away your lifeblood. It seems like people get so fixated on some of these ideas that it takes away like everything else. Like, that's the only thing that matters as well. And yeah, I think keeping an open mind, and like Jill was saying, read about stuff in good places.
Yeah, and I think that this is actually like a really good place to kind of start wrapping up and doing final thoughts. But the one thing I wanted to add to that is one thing that I do is I try not to be too emotionally attached to my ideas or my beliefs or what I think is my knowledge. And so I was listening to a podcast that had JP Sears on, and he's on YouTube. So if you guys don't know who he is, look him up, and I'll post the specific podcast in the links. But he says, have your beliefs, but don't believe your beliefs, which I know sounds really, really wonky, but what he was kind of saying was like, hold them loosely in your hands. And then when it's time to let that belief go, or when you don't have really a good reason to have that belief, just kind of let it go, hold it loosely. So I think that is the best way when it comes to just a really basic approach to any sort of knowledge. Like, just don't be afraid to let go of bad ideas or bad evidence or any sort of idea if it doesn't serve you, or if there's nothing to back it up, right? Don't be too emotionally attached to it that you stop like caring about the truth and start just caring about that belief.
Sounds like a good way to finish off this episode to me.
Yeah. So do you guys have any final thoughts before we call it quits?
I agree with you 100%. I think, hold on to everything tentatively.
Absolutely. Okay, well, this one has been really fun, guys. I really enjoyed it. I think that the time flies by a little too quickly. So everyone, don't forget to subscribe. Check us out on our Facebook page, and join us next week for our next show. But in the meantime, we are Laura,
Richard,
and Richard, and this has been Skeptic Hangout. Forgot the name of the show. Until next time,
keep questioning,
interrogate your beliefs,
and stay skeptical.
Bye.
Ta-ra.